right, so today's topic is generative AI in Christian evangelism. Just a little bit about me. So my name is Jake Carlson. I'm the founder of a nonprofit called the Apologetics Project. And we make conversational AI for Christian ministry. So this is kind of a topic that's near and dear to my heart. There have been quite a few talks already about AI in general. I'm going to specifically hone in on one kind of AI and its use cases for ministry. And that would include apologetics, obviously, but also more broadly evangelism. All right. So this is the topic we're going to be discussing today. How should Christians approach recent advances in generative AI when it comes to fulfilling the Great Commission? And I don't think I need to tell anybody what that means because you wouldn't be here if that weren't the case. So I already introduced myself. The topic today is going to be covering a white paper that I co-wrote with somebody else. So I'm going to introduce him real quick. This is Ted Hallam. He's currently working at Ligonier. But he used to work for IBM, and he's also kind of like-minded in terms of using generative AI for commissional use cases. All right. So originally, this slot was going to be taken up on the C.S. Lewis track by a guy named McGallagher. Forgot his last name. He got sick, so you got me. Sorry for that. But since this is a C.S. Lewis track, I figured I'd throw in some obligatory C.S. Lewis quotes. But they actually do end up dovetailing really nicely with the talk. So this is from a letter that C.S. Lewis wrote to Arthur Clarke. Said, "I agree technology per se is neutral, but a race devoted to the increase of its own power by technology with complete indifference to ethics does seem to me a cancer in the universe. Certainly if he goes on his present course much further, man cannot be trusted with knowledge." And the second quote I've got from C.S. Lewis here, this is kind of interesting. There's some philosophers who have really enjoyed kind of like the way this is framed for technology, especially modern technology. So there's something which unites magic and applied science, which is another term for technology, the way C.S. Lewis was using it, while separating both from the wisdom of earlier ages. For wise men of old, the cardinal problem has been how to conform the soul to reality, and the solution had been knowledge, self-discipline, and virtue. For magic and applied science or technology alike, the problem is how to subdue reality to the wishes of men. The solution is a technique. So what he's saying there is essentially, it used to be, C.S. Lewis obviously was writing kind of in the 50s and 60s kind of time frame here. It used to be that man saw reality and felt the need to understand it and form their own souls to live in that reality. And now he saw a shift where technology had gotten to the point, and this is obviously quite a long time ago, 75 years ago or so, that man was now forming the world around what he felt it should be, right? So there's a different frame of reference there. But if you couple that with the quote before, it's not that technology is bad per se or anything like that. It's neutral, but the frame of reference is how can we conform reality to how we want it to be to live in comfort or whatever your goals are, right? That kind of thing. All right. So this is kind of the thesis that we're putting forward. When used with discernment, generative AI can merge biblical soul-forming wisdom with new techniques that can reach this generation, including those who are otherwise unlikely to come into contact with Christians at all. And so this is kind of dovetailing off of the C.S. Lewis quote there. So we agree that the soul-forming wisdom of the ancients, right, or it doesn't have to do with time at all necessarily, but anybody who has wisdom, those are good things. But then how do we utilize that wisdom to reach this generation? All right, so I want to start with some audience participation here. I've devised a scale, and this is just something I came up with, right? But the idea here is there's a lot of discussion in the world right now, especially in Christian circles, about how far to go with the use of AI. And so we're going to talk a lot about some of the theological concepts behind our thesis about AI, but at first I want to start with kind of just a discussion about where people are at right now. This is a little bit of market research, frankly, for me, because I like to know, one of the reasons I go to these conferences is to understand what the prevailing kind of thought about artificial intelligence is with ministries and also the people who attend these kind of conferences. So we got this end of the spectrum where some people might think AI is demonic. It's of the devil or whatever you want to call it. And on the far end, there's some people who believe that you can essentially create an AI, artificial intelligence god, or even emulate Jesus in some capacity. And then there's a spectrum in between. So what I want to do is I'm going to go through each one of these, and I'd like people to raise their hands. And if you raise your hand, that means you think that use of artificial intelligence is okay, morally. Does that make sense? All right, so first one is AI-generated suggestions, right? So that's like, hey, I'm writing an email. It would be good if, Google or Gmail or whatever could tell me hey, what's the next word or something like that. That's artificial intelligence. Who thinks that use is okay? Raise your hand. All right. HIL stands for human in the loop. HOL stands for human out of the loop. And what that means is the use of artificial intelligence in the loop. That means that artificial intelligence will suggest something to you. It may generate the content, but it asks for your confirmation that it's okay. So we're going to take it up a notch here. And instead of just Gmail saying hey, what's the next word? I can autocomplete. This is more like autocomplete. This is hey, draft my email for me, but don't send it out until I look at it and actually click go. Who thinks that's an okay use of artificial intelligence? All right, cool. All right, human out of the loop. Who thinks it's okay to use artificial intelligence to not only draft the email, but without you seeing it, respond to somebody based on that?
So hey, I'm out of the office today.
Yeah. Well, that one probably isn't. It depends, right? So that one's probably not artificial intelligence if you set it and you just say hey, I'm going to be out of the office for these dates. And if an email comes in during that time, it's more of a deterministic thing where the system will know that you're out of the office because you told it. Now, if it were a system that inferred somehow that you were out of the office because, say, you don't have any activity on your work computer or something like that, that might be more of artificial intelligence. So it depends on the specifics of that. So a lot less people raised their hand when we talked about a human not being involved, right? Does that make sense? All right. So next one is AI chatbots, right? So using artificial intelligence to respond to somebody, that's human out of the loop, right? There's not a human that's going to intercede between the user who's asking the question and the chatbot responding. How many people that one agree or disagree? So if you agree that is an okay use case, raise your hand.
Would that be like when we're trying to send something back to Amazon and we have to talk to a computer back and forth before they let us?
Exactly, right.
That's demonic.
Yeah. 100%.
Okay. Well, we'll talk about that. All right.
Automated answering services are a resort of a fall. I will style that here.
Okay, this is going to be interesting talk then. All right, and then the next step up is AI voice agents. So not just text-based responses, but voice coming back, right? Does that change your perception of it, whether it's text-based or voice? Does it make it a different category for you at all? All right, well, the next step up, how about video? Right, so if I'm talking to, a lot of people are comfortable talking with a text-based, chat agent to, help them, do a return or something like that, or just get information, right? People are fine with that. And then voice is kind of the next step up, where it's okay, can I call a hotline, right, to maybe a customer service use case? But if the voice that comes back is not a real human, is that a problem? Right? And then imagine this as well, video. So you up the ante a little bit to video avatars, right? So how comfortable, even if you're comfortable with talking with an AI-generated voice, would you be comfortable with hopping on a Zoom call or something like that to interface with a video avatar that's powered by AI and have them converse back and forth? This is happening all over the place, right? This is happening especially in a lot of folks are doing it for more relational type things, right? And if anybody heard the talk by who was it? What was the AI talk? By Kristen Davis today. This is more of the relational aspect that she cited as kind of being a little bit more dangerous, right? So you're not only letting AI produce a response, but it's trying to emulate humans by showing an actual video avatar. It's not like a cartoon. It's like it's meant to be photorealistic, right? Yeah, questions?
I don't want to keep interrupting you.
Sure.
If you don't want feedback, if you want feedback. Would there be a deviance between it's something?
That's a good point, yeah.
Or like, you see videos now of
Yeah.
athletes and different stuff, and you don't even know what to believe anymore.
That's a very good question, yeah. Yeah, so let's assume for the sake of this that the user is aware that it is AI generated. But that is a very good point, yeah. And that would go for any of this stuff, right? So, but on that topic, is it wrong to not divulge that you used AI for an auto-suggest in your email? I don't think most people would say that it's wrong for people not to say that. I think the dividing line with that is the human in the loop or the human out of the loop. That's my conviction, right? So this distinction between, it's totally fine for AI to help us do stuff, but the end product has to be rubber stamped by a human being. That's a really pervasive kind of thought. And even those who I think are okay with some of these other things still would say it's important that be we divulge that. It's a disclaimer or whatever, right? All right, so there's some other use cases here that get a little bit, I don't suspect based on what the hands have been raised for and the other ones that these are going to be controversial at all. But then we've got AI-generated worship, AI-generated sermons, and then before the most extreme case here, autonomous AI pastors who can pray for you, counsel you, that kind of thing. So what I'm hearing so far is where I see the drop-off is kind of in this area right here, right? There aren't too many people who are okay with voice agents, and yet I'm sure you've been using them, right? So my question to you then is, why does that seem morally unacceptable? I'd like to hear some thoughts about that. Go ahead.
My concern, even if I start with smaller, like AI-generated suggestions, okay?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if we start with, it's just a little thing, and then it's kind of like a camera putting its nose into a tent, and then it just keeps going on and on from there. So I'm not even sure I can sign off on AI-generated suggestions right now.
Just because it snowballs in your mind, it's kind of a slippery slope.
Yeah, I sent a friend of mine some yesterday because we talked about, he's a big science fiction fan. It seems to be, if you look at science fiction, it says, hey, don't do this thing, don't do this thing, don't do this thing. And our thing is, hey, we did the thing. Every time you see a movie with AI, it turns out badly.
That is true. And yet, and this isn't part of the presentation, but just as a comment to that, all of us, I'm pretty sure it's safe to say, have been using AI for a very long time and didn't even know it. Right? AI is not a new thing. It seems like it's novel right now because a lot of the consumer products are now very open about what they're doing behind the scenes. But AI is not a new thing. I don't know if anybody has heard of the Colson Center, but they're basically a program for Christian worldview kind of boot camp. And one of my colleagues, when going through that program, he had worked on Israel's Iron Dome program, which was in the 70s basically a missile interception program, right, to obviously intercept missiles from other countries who wanted Israel annihilated, right? That was using artificial intelligence. It was using predictive analysis to figure out where the missile was going to be. Not where the missile is, but where it was going to be, right? So that's a use case of artificial intelligence going back to the 70s. And the birth of artificial intelligence really was attributed down in as early as the 50s, right? So it's not a new thing. It's just that it's been consumerized in the last, say, 5 years to the extent that it's become kind of in the collective conscience. But it is not a new thing. Yeah, go ahead.
Some of my area of study is Christianity and video games.
Mm-hmm.
And to some extent, that has to involve some AI.
Sure.
Doesn't, because if I'm playing and here comes my enemy, well, there's no human person on the other side controlled by enemy, but that's kind of a primitive AI.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Well, I would go as far as to say, even with, I guess it comes down to, at surface level, but deeper, AI-generated worship. Small church has no piano player. If there is some kind of generated program, that's what you're doing. You know the content that's flowing into it. that could be a good thing. You know,
Sure.
I think the line draws right about there
Yeah.
in some ways, but I mean, I can see pastoring a small church and you need music, and you have something that generates a worship list. I mean, you know, out of an approved funnel.
Sure.
And I mean, I don't even see that being bad.
Yeah. No.
Maybe some folks would, you know, cringe at it in a church, but I mean, I can see it being a good tool.
So now, are you making reference to that based on the production of a playlist, or the songs themselves, or both?
I mean, I think you'd have to have some kind of filtering of where it's pulling from.
Uh-huh.
But I would think let them pick a song list, and I mean, I can see that being on.
Sure.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
not generating the music itself.
Yeah, not
but
generating music, selecting a worship set and actually playing it and
Sure.
everything.
If I use an AI pastor, it doesn't make bad jokes, does it?
That's definitely
It might.
one of a pastor. You got to make a bad joke every now and then.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so there's a lot of nuance. Really, what I'm trying to get at here, though, is that there's this reaction to some of these things, but then you get into the nuance. It's like, well, I mean, is there any like moral prohibition against using AI to do a playlist? Is that somehow harming worship? I don't think so, right? There's a lot of nuance, and I'm not going to tell you what to believe or anything like that. Obviously, we have a position on the topic, but just for your knowledge, I'll give the nuance here that I've experienced in wrestling with myself. Again, not because I know I'm right or anything like that, just to give you some insight. So AI chatbots, that's what my nonprofit does. Okay, voice is interesting because it's a lot more convenient for a couple reasons. One is there are plenty of people who are illiterate, right? But they can talk to something, and if that chatbot is providing good biblical responses, I don't think that's a bad thing, right? Video gets different for me. Video is, I don't see the logistical advantage of video over voice, and it takes another step further into anthropomorphizing AI. And so right now, and I'm not saying I won't change my position, but right now, this is where I draw the line. That's where I draw the line. So I'll talk a little bit more about what all that means. I'll unpack it a little bit more, but that's kind of where I'm at. So, all right. Okay, so we're going to take a step back now. So I'm going to define generative AI a little bit. Now that we've talked about some of the, what it looks like, we're going to talk about kind of the definition for it. And I'm also going to take a step back and talk a little bit about Christianity's historical relationship with technology in general. So this QR code is the white paper that this talk is going to follow. And so the general arc of the talk is going to follow that white paper. That QR code is going to show up on a bunch of different slides. So if you miss it now, you can scan it later. No big deal. All right, so I think I'm going to be preaching to the choir on some of these things, but just for review, Christianity really laid the groundwork for modern science, right? Most of the scientific disciplines, whoever is considered the father of that discipline, more likely than not was a Bible-believing Christian, right? And so what's happened, though, is as certain secular philosophies and science that has called into question some of the things that were kind of taken for granted since kind of the 1850s or so, the advent of macroevolution with Darwin and so forth. What's happened is because those ideas have come through a scientific lens, that's driven some Christians to kind of recoil from the idea of science entirely, right? Because they see how the spread of evolutionary theory has influenced the philosophy of the world toward atheism. Some Christians respond to that by kind of recoiling and saying, like, okay, science is bad, or I don't want to deal with that, right? And so what's happened is some Christians, not everybody, obviously, some Christians have then, that's parlayed into a skepticism of new technology, right? And that's not to say that that's always a bad thing. I'm just saying the general attitude has been, because science has kind of overtaken the religious, framework that we used to have, some Christians will view new technological advancement with distrust. All All right, so one of our theses of the paper is, instead of opposing scientific progress, we need to reclaim science as a reflection of God's creative order, right? Because as Christians, we believe that the world was created by God. He was created it to be intelligible by the sciences, and we should not be afraid to reclaim the sciences as worship toward God, right? Those are worthwhile and holy endeavors. All right, so I'm going to run through some of the technologies now. We're going to steer the focus a little bit toward evangelism specifically, because that's what the topic of this is. So I'm going to go through a few. So Roman roads were instrumental in the spread of the early gospel, right? So Roman roads, that would be infrastructure, okay? So in other words, not only did you have this new, Jesus' message and the apostles spreading the gospel, but the fact that there was the infrastructure to get around and for Paul to travel so far as he did was in large part due to Roman roads. So that's infrastructure. Now we're going to talk about medium, the parchment, right? So there was papyrus, and that was pretty prevalent during the day, but that was, that was the reeds from Egypt primarily, and that had some problems with it, right? It was kind of brittle. And so parchment is actually using animal skins. And what happened was the technology had grown to the point where the parchment was reusable, it was more durable, and that also facilitated the spread of the gospel. So you have the infrastructure of Roman roads and parchment, so infrastructure and medium, coming together during the time of Jesus and beyond, that really helped facilitate the spread of the gospel rapidly. Okay? Those are both technologies. We don't think of those things as revolutionary, but they were at that time. For those people, that was new. That was a new technology that enabled the spread of information rapidly, right? And I'm going to skip a lot here, because I don't have time for all of it, but we're going to fast forward to the printing press, really famous, like Gutenberg, right? So why was a printing press invented? What was the first thing that was printed? Does anybody know? The Bible, right? And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a bit, right? And then fast forward a little bit further, radio, television, and then finally the internet, right? And I put social media on here not because it was a new technology so much as a new technique or a new method or a new kind of way of implementing a technology. But nonetheless, all of these things in progression have helped spread the gospel throughout the ages, right? And so my question then becomes, does artificial intelligence, is that just the next evolution of gospel, projecting the gospel to the world? And we're going to talk about that today. All right. So, I have something to read here. This is a recent addition to this talk, and we'll see how it goes. But I looked up an article about the implementation of a technology. It's one of the technologies on this list. Okay, I'm going to read the article. I redacted some of the particulars so that it wouldn't be 100% clear what technology I'm talking about. And then at the end of this, I want us to vote on which of these technologies you think it's talking about. Okay, so I'm going to read this. It'll be a little long, but bear with me. All right, so here it is. It required a great deal of specialist equipment and even more investment. Producing the output was relatively cheap, but creating the mechanism to do so could be extremely expensive. While the costs of labor and energy were positively eye-watering, that was the end of the sentence. While the labor and energy were positively eye-watering. One way of minimizing the risk was specialization. There was nothing to stop one from stealing work and rushing out a pirated version. Nor did it completely supplant traditional production. Quite the reverse, in fact. Traditional works were still being commissioned, and content producers were still much in demand. As with all great innovations, the market took time to adjust, and there was as much uncertainty about the future as there was continuity with the past. Yet, however, uncertain the fate of the technology or incomplete the replacement of the employed workers, the shock of the technology was profound. As the historian Martin Lowry noted, it must have been both a traumatic and exhilarating experience. All that seemed familiar was abruptly thrown into confusion, and as people scrambled to adapt to the sudden availability of knowledge, it was only natural that questions were also raised about the wider social implications of the new technology. For many, the technology was an overwhelmingly positive innovation. Almost as soon as the technology was established, learned men rushed to sing its praises. To some, in fact, it seemed almost divine. Some wrote that it was a miracle unheard of in all previous ages. One of its principal attractions was that it had the potential to democratize knowledge. In the past, the high cost of the old medium had meant that only the well-to-do could afford it. Now that the old medium could be produced more easily, however, knowledge could be sold for much lower prices, making it available to those of lesser means for the first time. As a prominent thinker remarked, it was also possible for even the poorest to build a library of knowledge of his own and for learning to become accessible to all. It was expressly designed to make available to the masses knowledge which had previously been restricted only to the few. As some observers recognized, this had a range of knock-on effects. For some, the most important of these was permanence. Some believed that the flood of new knowledge would lead to moral enlightenment, but not everyone was so enthusiastic. Others, from whom novelty and progress were far from synonymous, regarded the new technology with open hostility. Like many of its contemporaries, a prominent religious thinker did not have any particular objection to the idea of new technology, but he reviled the inventors of the new technology as beggars and thieves who were always hungry for money. In doing so, they were not democratizing learning, but debasing it. Whereas in the past, the expense and scarcity of the previous medium had ensured that great care was always taken over the preparation of it, the ease with which the new technology could be produced, coupled with the intense competition between the producers of the new technology, had led to all manner of rubbish being churned out. These days, you could hardly view the new technology without it being festooned with errors. This clearly did immense damage both to scholarship and to education. By putting such defective knowledge into the hands of the masses, he claimed, even the uneducated would feel qualified to convey knowledge in which they were not knowledgeable. But the technology producers were interested only in making a quick buck off such uneducated fools. They had no incentive to do any better. All that mattered was getting a new version to the market as quickly as possible, irrespective of its quality. The prominent religious thinker also believed that the new technology was a threat to public morality. He argued the inaccessibility of knowledge helped keep the common people on the straight and narrow. Unable to understand the scholarship, they relied on scholars to explain the meaning of the text and practices appropriated to life. But now that the knowledge was appearing in an easily accessible medium, even the most ignorant might feel emboldened to try interpreting truth for themselves. As such, there was serious risk that honest folk would be led far from the path of true knowledge. It was for this reason that he called on the authorities to banish it forever. As Martin Lowry noted, it is perhaps tempting to dismiss the prominent religious thinker as a throwback. The last survivor, this is a quote, the last survivor of a doomed generation screaming in the faces of a solid phalanx of noblemen, intellectuals, and artisans who march shoulder to shoulder toward enlightenment and a better life. But this would do him a disservice. He was far from alone in his views. Many shared his skepticism of the new technology. Indeed, so new was the technology and so rapidly was its landscape changing that even those who could see some advantages were alarmed by its risks. Another prominent religious thinker even asserted that the manifestations of the new medium then in circulation were so inaccurate that it would have been better if they had never existed. Though such concerns sometimes tended toward the hysterical, they were grounded less in hope than in reality. With certain notable exceptions, producers of the new technology did indeed turn out a lot of faulty knowledge. To make matters worse, some of these even drove better versions off the market. Whether the new technology corrupted public morals is perhaps open to question. Yet there can be no denying that the new technology did contribute to the spread of more diverse thought and was later instrumental in the dissemination of knowledge. However distasteful a character the prominent religious thinker may seem, his polemics against the new technology hence serve to illustrate that, amid the fog of change, the line between progress and peril can appear blurred, even to the most keen-eyed observer. It is perhaps just as well that, in this case, wishful thinking prevailed over unpleasant, if not unjustified, fears. Anybody see any parallels between that and AI and the rhetoric around that these days? Sorry, that was a little longer than I realized, but you get the idea. So, who thinks that quote was referring to parchment? We'll skip Roman roads because obviously isn't that? It's about a medium. Printing press, radio, television, internet, social media. You're right, it was a printing press. So the point there is we tend to think, every generation has new technology coming out, and there's generally, a more positive outlook on that technology, and then there's naysayers, right? And that doesn't mean, what I'm not saying is that, because look at the printing press, that turned out to be a wild success, that AI, therefore, is a wild success. That's not what I'm saying. What I am saying, though, is that it should give us pause if you can see those parallels of the way that the printing press was received, right? Because if you think back to the printing press, that was a dangerous proposition for the ruling class at the time. It was a democratization of knowledge, right? Obviously it spurred on the Reformation, right? Where people could then, there was religious texts being produced in the common tongue on these cheap printing presses, right? With a lot of parallels to kind of how AI is kind of shunned and how the internet was before it. So that's really the only thing I'm trying to point out there is that our generation is dealing with artificial intelligence. The generation before that, well, depending on how old you are, I'm a little older than some people, but I witnessed kind of the advent of the internet, and all the same kind of rhetoric around artificial intelligence was there. I wasn't alive during television when it started, or radio, or the printing press, obviously. But the point is even back then, it is almost universally true that when a new technology comes out, there's a trade-off, right? There's a trade-off, and it's not that the people who are against it in some way are completely wrong, right? It's that you lose something when you go to a new technology, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the overall benefit of the technology isn't there, right? I think universally we would all agree that it's great to have printing, a printing press, right? And maybe not so much social media for some people, but pretty much everything else on here, I think people would agree, that was great. We all use it all the time. Yes, we may have lost something. We need to be careful about those things. We need to be discerning. But overall, all of these things were to the benefit of humanity. And if you disagree with that, then you're a hypocrite because I see you all on computers. So, all right. Let's see. Okay, so this is kind of bringing it back a little bit to more of the advent of the internet, but one of our mottos is we need to meet people where they are, right? So historically, that phrase has been used in terms of hey, you need to meet somebody spiritually where they are, right? If you come to an atheist, you're not going to just engage with them the same way as you have maybe a Christian who's just maybe just doubting some part of his faith or something like that, right? So, and in a similar way, you won't approach a Hindu the same way as you would an atheist, right? So that's kind of what that term or phrase has come to mean. But I want to expand it a little bit and say not only is it meeting people where they're at in a spiritual way, and indeed we send out missionaries to go physically where people are, right? So we send missionaries to all the ends of the earth to physically meet with them where they are, but also where are they spending their time, right? That's also where they are. So a good part of the world, about 70%, 71% last I checked actually, has access to the internet and uses it, right? So the point is that where they are is also where they spend time, right? You could physically be in a location with somebody, I could be sitting in a room at a coffee shop in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, and some of the youth there would be on their phone in their own little world, right? So you're physically right next to them, but that's not where they're paying attention. They're paying attention online, right? And so the charge is, how do we meet them in those spaces, regardless of where they are physically? How do we get their attention, right? And what I'm saying is we have to be in places where they're spending their time, right? And so in a general sense, I'm going to say that's a digital space. In a more specific sense, people are using AI. Are we there? Are Christians there? Are we using that technology to reach those generations? All right, so what is generative AI in a general sense? I gave some examples, but I want to kind of define it. So the distinguishing mark between generative AI is that it generates. It creates something new based on patterns that it's learned from its training, right? So what it creates is going to depend on the purpose, right? So large language models deal with natural language processing, and that's just a fancy way of saying, can the machine understand language, right? So if I write a sentence, you as a human, if you know that language and have learned the words, the vocabulary, you'll understand the meaning of that, right? You'll understand like what that language is trying to convey, right? So large language models are an attempt at understanding the language that you send to it, but then also generating a probabilistic response to that, right? Now, that's for text generation. Other forms of generative AI would be image generation, video generation, anything that can be created, right, as a response to something or to convey some kind of information, right? So we're contrasting that with the same example before of the Iron Dome, where you're intercepting missiles or something like that. That's not generative. You're not creating anything. You're just you're analyzing data to make a prediction. That's different than generating something, right? Or creating something from scratch. Oh, not from scratch. I'll get to that in a minute. So it's really just trying to emulate human-like responses based on its understanding of language. I'm going to use some words that are a little bit anthropomorphizing AI. So when I say even the word like understand, technically that's not what I mean, right? It's just a useful way to frame it. So the AI is trained on pattern matching based on linguistic patterns, and then it is calculating probabilities to then generate what makes the most probable sense to output in response to that. All right, so I'm going to take a sidebar really quick and just kind of help you guys understand what I mean by probabilistic, right? So when I, type into a chatbot, what's the capital of France, right? It analyzes that information, and then based on its training, it then tries to synthesize that information that it's been trained on, and then it understands that the most probable thing is going to be this answer, right? This sequence, and not even just this answer, but this sequence of words specifically, right? And so the reason why, especially the earlier models that maybe were in circulation, you could really see the words kind of chunk out little by little, right? So it was the streaming text, right? That's not just an effect for reading that looks cool. It's actually a requirement, because what was actually happening is it wouldn't figure out the entirety of the response at once. It would literally calculate the probability of each word as it came out, or maybe a few words at a time. And so literally it was thinking like, okay, I've seen a lot of, based on the information that I've been trained on, I've seen a lot of information that starts this way, right? And it would start that, and then based on how it started, it would then calculate very quickly the probability of the ending to that sequence, right? So that streaming of text was literally like you were basically looking at a word calculator spitting out stuff right before your eyes, okay? So now here's the bad news, right? So all these LLMs put out by commercial vendors, right? They are meant to go to the masses, right? So they want to have the most broad appeal. Anybody who saw Kristen Davis's talk, she made a really important point, and that is these are companies that are trying to make money. At the end of the day, they are trying to make money, right? And so how do you make the best mass market product that you can appeal to as many people as you can, right? Obvious. So what that does, though, is all of those models were built to be, by definition, religiously pluralistic, or another way of saying that is postmodern and relativistic, right? So in other words, if you ask ChatGPT, Anthropic's Claude, or Google Gemini, the question like, is Jesus God, right? It's not going to say Jesus is God, and it's not going to say Jesus is not God. It's going to say, well, Christians believe that, but Muslims believe that he was just a prophet, and atheists believe that he was just some dude, right? So that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to hedge, right? Because by default, they don't want to offend anybody. They want to appeal to the most mass market. And also, it should go without saying as well, that the makers of these technologies, they imbued their worldview into it as well, to an extent, right? I don't know the exact religious beliefs of all of them, right? But to a certain extent, they're going along with kind of the prevailing secular thought, which is, if anybody saw Greg Kogel's, talk, is going to be, religion is just a preference, right? So like some people believe that, but we're not gonna try and peg truth claims that way, right? So what we're doing at our nonprofit, though, is I love this analogy. My co-author came up with this. So what we're trying to do is direct AI. We build capabilities on top of those religiously pluralistic models to force them to assent to a Christian worldview, right? And I love this analogy that he uses. He uses it's like putting a bit in a horse's mouth, right? Because the idea with artificial intelligence, specifically the generative AI, is that it's not necessarily completely deterministic. There's a level of variability that is both present but also desirable. Like you don't want the exact same result every single time. You want this idea that it's probabilistic within a certain level of guardrails. And so this idea of putting a bit in a horse's mouth, right? That kind of conveys the idea that you're directing it within a frame, but there's some variance there, right? Like you're not going to predictably control a horse down to the millimeter, right? But you pull it this way, it's going to go that way, right? And so what we're trying to do is retain some of that creativity, but putting it within a certain level of guardrails that will stay on that path, right? All right. Okay. So let's take a quick sidebar here and talk about what generative AI is not. So we talked about, I think one of the reasons why this technology is so scary is because people are scared of the unknown, right? They see something that is generating human-like qualities, and because they don't understand the technology behind it, that scares people, right? And that's been true throughout history, right? But I'm hoping to demystify some of that with you. Like if you just realize, for example, that generative AI, especially chatbots in particular, it's just a word calculator at the end of the day. Like it boils down to mathematical representations of language, right? And because our computational power in the modern era has grown to where it's at, it looks and feels human because it's able to generate a response very quickly, but at the end of the day, it is really just math, okay? And so hopefully by demystifying that, we can realize that just because it seems human doesn't mean it's any less machine than an abacus, right? It is the same mechanistic, deterministic kind of function that older technology would do. It's just so fast and it's amazing, and it kind of fools us into thinking that it's human, right? So just to be 100% clear, even folks like me who are very excited about AI, very excited about the ability to use AI for evangelism and apologetics, I still agree with this. AI has no soul. It's just it's a word calculator. That's all it is, right? For LLMs, it can't commune with God, has no soul, has no moral agency. It's not going to come up with its own way to determine a moral action or anything like that. It's just going to work within the frame that you define. Garbage in, garbage out. I think people have heard that phrase. And this is really important. There's nothing that's truly creative about it. It might emulate things. Like I can combine, some people say that stealing is the best form of flattery in art, right? So it's kind of like along those lines where yes, you can give it training and let it condense and combine things, and you might in a certain way of defining it, you might call that creative. But the point is it has to come from something. It has to come from some material. It's not going to create a completely novel idea that's outside of its inputs, right? Whereas humans can only do that, right? So it's going to emulate. And very importantly, AI does not possess the image of God, the imago Dei, right? That's a unique trait to human beings. No other animals on the planet possess that. And then here's that word again. So therefore, because of all these traits, we should try to not anthropomorphize AI. Anthropomorphize means attributing uniquely human qualities to another thing, right? So if you see an avatar, the reason why you have that gut reaction is you know it's not a human, but it's trying to fake being a human, right? And that somehow, I think, for a lot of people, that feels wrong, right? And we saw earlier with the scale that I don't think everybody agrees with where that line is, and that's okay, right? But I think most people agree that there is a line. Let's put it that way, right? And that's where you need to be really careful, like to define what uniquely makes us human and what is okay and what is not okay for something that's not human to do, especially without human kind of intervention, right? All right. So, in spite of all that, I believe the Holy Spirit works through the gospel's truth regardless of the tools or platform used to deliver it, right? John 3:16, if it's John writing the gospel, he wrote it. He didn't speak that to everybody, right? He wrote it, right? We believe he wrote it, right? That was conveyed on a piece of paper, right? Paul's epistles, written on a piece of paper. He wasn't there to tell everyone all those things. He wrote it down, right? That was conveyed on a medium, right? And so again, like we tend to think of these technological advancements at the time and just like, oh, it's just paper. It's nothing like AI. No, it actually is quite a bit like that. It was a new technology at the time that allowed the conveyance of a message, right, without the presence of the person being there, right? And then you fast forward to the printing press that then democratized all that and mass production. You get to the internet, and of course, John 3:16 is still John 3:16, but now it's on a screen. So is that any less spiritual? Does that impact people any less? You know? And then you come up to social media, right? Just because it's on Facebook, is the potency of John 3:16 any different because you read it on Facebook versus on a parchment that John wrote or whatever it is, right? And then you get to AI, right? And that's where, because we're where we are in society at this time, such a time as this, that's the newest thing, right? And then we have to struggle with, like, is there something we're losing if AI tells a user in a chatbot what John 3:16 says? Is the message of that diminished because AI said it? Or is the message objective truth, or take it outside of anything else? Is the message no matter what the medium, right? It's something we have to kind of wrestle with. Of course, I would say that the external stimuli of the message can be affected by the medium, but the message remains the same no matter what. Like, it might be more powerful, for example, if I heard someone from a pulpit kind of say eloquent things, right, rather than reading it. Maybe the impact, people will dramatize things. So what I'm not saying is that the medium doesn't affect the message. I'm saying that the message nonetheless is still there regardless of the medium, right? And that message can then impact us in similar ways based on the workings of the Holy Spirit in us. Does that make sense? All right. All right. So I'm going to talk about some more practical things related to this, and I'm going to try to leave some time for kind of more discussion and questions at the end. So when we're talking about AI, we talk about guardrails. Like, I kind of use that term a little bit, and I didn't really define it, but it's basically creating mechanisms, some boundaries from which AI can operate, right? So we're talking about generative AI, in particular LLMs. These are kind of the four things that I would kind of point to that we as humans can use to put that bit in the horse's mouth, like the analogy I was using earlier, right? So fine-tuning is this idea that you can, the large language model has been trained, but you can kind of impact its training. You can put a layer on top of that original training by giving it more patterns to understand and emulate, right? So for example, I could take, an open source model that was produced by someone who, a company that allows other people to kind of tinker with it. I can fine tune it and say, like, hey, whenever you get a question about, it seems like someone wants to commit suicide, don't just answer it, don't just be sycophantic and say like, oh yeah, that's a great idea. You should actually tell that person to get some help. Like you should tell the person, go call this number, right? So that's an example of what you can do with fine-tuning is like, when you recognize this pattern, do this thing. And what you'll do is you'll feed it examples of the input and what the output you want it to be. And if you give it enough information about that, then it effectively makes the large language model understand those patterns and then therefore do an action based on that. Prompt engineering. So every LLM has its set of primary directives or primary instructions, right? It's called a system prompt for us. But basically, that's the definition of how you want it to behave, right? And so, a ChatGPT or something like that, that's where OpenAI would define like, hey, you're a helpful assistant. You're not gonna necessarily agree with any religious viewpoint. You're gonna leave it open-ended, that kind of thing, right? Red teaming is more reactive. So these are kind of two proactive ways to set guardrails up. And then red teaming is more of a reactive thing. So that means like, so you guys are familiar with the concept of like hackers, right? They try to break into systems. In the same way, you can do what's kind of called adversarial testing, which is kind of the same concept but applied to large language models. You can try to basically put a prompt in to try and trip up the AI to see if it'll break or say the wrong thing or something like that, right? So in the context of religious use cases for evangelism, you throw at like a really complicated question. I'm sure people who go to this seminary are pretty good at that, right? You give it a really complicated question or one that tests its resolve to adhere to its system instructions to affirm a Christian viewpoint, right? So that kind of thing, like, oh, what about this? And then finally, retrieval augmented generation. So the idea of retrieval augmented generation, or it's called RAG for short, is in addition to the training of the model, you can also give it real-time access to real-time information, right? You can say, you can set up a system where not only will the AI kind of rely on the knowledge it's gained and the pattern it knows, but it will reference kind of external documents or external information to derive an answer, right? So maybe the AI doesn't actually know the capital of France, but you give it a way to access that information, like a database of countries and capitals, right? So that it's not a built-in system for it to know those things offhand, but it has access to that information to reference it very quickly. It's almost like it can do a quick Google search on that information based on the keywords, or semantic search, I'll define that in a second, and get that information and then synthesize that information and bring it back down. Who here has used ChatGPT or some other conversational AI? Most people, right? Okay, yeah, so you've used it. So one of the common use cases for that is you can add a bunch of content to it and ask the AI to synthesize it. So you'll say, ChatGPT, can you just, I don't want to read this whole thing, just tell me tell me the summary of all this content, right? Now, when you do that, ChatGPT and any of the commercial models will do a pretty good job, honestly. It's not going to inject, even if the text you put in there is religious in nature, you're not asking it to tell you what it thinks about that information. You're just asking it to do a task, right? So even though LLMs are by nature religiously pluralistic, that doesn't really factor into that task. It's literally just a kind of a mechanistic, like just summarize this stuff, right? And so in the same way, if you give the LLM the information you want it to reference, it's going to do a pretty darn good job of just summarizing that information, right? So if I ask an AI that has access only to good biblical Christian worldview content, and I ask the question, is Jesus God? The answer is going to be, well, heck yeah, I have 100,000 documents that say Jesus is God, because that's what it's referencing, right? And so by using these techniques, we can effectively put the bit in the horse's mouth, right? We can get it to the point where it will faithfully respond using the content that we want it to and the viewpoint we want it to. All right, so this is just a diagram of how that works. This is a little technical. It's kind of simplified, but it also, I think it's probably about the right level for, I'm assuming not everyone here is a software engineer or anything like that. But so you got a person here, they prompt the conversational AI, so this is like a ChatGPT or whatever it is. And what happens is, before you even send the prompt to the large language model, you get all that reference material, right? You get the reference material, and then you send not only the question, but all the information that you want it to reference to answer the question. So you say, basically, when the LLM finally gets it, you say, here's the question, but in order to answer it, use this content. It's the same thing as you would do as a normal user with ChatGPT when you say, here's a bunch of information, summarize it, right? It's the same thing. You're just asking the large language model to summarize all that information that you gave it, and then it responds and it comes back to the user. All right, so I'm going to kind of start to wrap up here so we have a little bit of time for questions and so forth. But it's really important, although I'm very obviously bullish on the use of AI for missional use cases, we need to make sure, right, that it isn't a substitute for the loving presence and community of believers, right? So just because we can get AI to the point where it can answer really good biblically based answers, it's not going to give you a hug, right? It's not going to sit there and cry with you. It's not going to lament with you, right? And so this danger of anthropomorphizing it to the point of anything, using it for a substitute for physical contact and just the presence of another human being, that's, I think, where the danger lies, okay? So I don't ever think that I will approve of an AI use case that tries to remove humans altogether. But from a standpoint of quicker knowledge access, it's unbelievably amazing, right? And that's a different thing than a pastor or something like that. Like a pastor, I'm fairly confident that AI can beat the pants off of a pastor on knowledge. Because if I give it access to all of Christendom's greatest hits, right, of theology, I'm sure it could do a pretty darn good job and beat the pants off, in terms of speed and accuracy of pretty much any pastor's knowledge or anything like that. Doesn't matter. The AI is not going to give you a hug. It's not going to lament with you. It's not going to walk you through a counseling session. It's different, right? And we have to recognize that. But as a pure source of knowledge, it's pretty powerful. The other advantages, though, that we've seen, right, is this is kind of you're going to have to wrestle with this one. But right after I said, the AI can't lament with you, the truth is that people open up to AI differently and more readily sometimes than humans, right? And that there's a couple reasons for that. One is if people know that it's an AI, they know they're not going to get judged. It's a machine. It's like my Roomba's not going to judge me for my mess, right? You don't have that thought, right? So at the same time, there's a thin line there, though, where there may be acceptable uses of AI that helps people, right, get the resources they need, or even responds with knowledge, right? And the things that are discussed with an AI might it's not even hypothetical. I know this for a fact, right? And I'll give you an example here in a second. But people will open up to AI in a lot of cases and talk to it about things that they would never talk to a human being about, right? Now the question is, what do you do with that, and what's the follow through? But I'm just going to leave that fact as something to think about. The more obvious thing, though, is even if it were true that your local pastor had all the knowledge in the world and was perfect and all that stuff, he still has to sleep, right? And he probably doesn't want to call in the middle at 3 a.m. in the morning, right? So the fact is the power of just the internet in general, but also AI in terms of actually responding to, in a personalized way, is that resource is going to be available 24/7. So it's an access problem as well. And then finally, what we found is even for online missionaries who kind of chat with, kind of their model is they chat with seekers, and try to have faith-based conversations for them. I forgot the reference. You'll have to forgive me, but it's in Matthew, I believe. But The harvest is plentiful and the workers are few, right? So that also applies to evangelism, or that is for evangelism, but also applies when we're talking about AI, right? So it's not only about, an AI, how do we scale human-like capabilities beyond what is humanly possible given the resources you have, but if you apply that concept to evangelism as well, you have to be discerning about where you draw that line, but in a general sense, AI can definitely help with that situation as well. So the example I was going to use about the anonymity is we've had a lot of usage in the Middle East and Southeast Asia, Indonesia in particular being the largest by population country in the world of Muslims. And in the Middle East, obviously, lots of Muslims there as well. In most of those countries, questioning religious doctrine or tradition is not just frowned upon, but there could be physical harm done to people, right? And moreover, because of some of those facts, the ratio of Christians, or even missionaries more specifically, but even just Christians, is extremely small compared to the number of people, right? So there could be, I forgot the stats at the moment, but it's some, I think it was 2 million in some of the hardest to reach Muslim countries. It's like 2 million people to every one Christian or one missionary, something like that. But even if I'm getting the number wrong, it's a huge disparity, right? So if we take the stance then that only human-to-human contact is okay when spreading the gospel, there will be a lot of unreached people forever, because that situation is not going to change anytime soon. So what we've seen in places like Turkey, for example, is we'll get prompts from people who cannot talk openly about the fact that they're exploring the Christian faith. They don't know where to go. They don't know what resources. You can't tell them to go to their local church. There is not a local church, right? And so the question is, can we get resources to those people in a way that facilitates those conversations and points them to Jesus and maybe, hopefully, points them to a way to get to humans, but that initial contact is extremely unlikely, right? So I look at it similar to, obviously, Christ exhorts us to, when he kind of spoke the words of the Great Commission, to make disciples of the nations, right? Baptize and make disciples of the nations, right? But that's not the only way the gospel spread, is it? You've probably heard of, especially people in the Muslim world having dreams, right, of Jesus and coming to faith in Christ through that with no contact to a human being. So I think that humans are used, and I don't, this is going to sound kind of probably a little odd, but I actually don't think humans are necessary, right, to spread the gospel, but God has chosen us to help spread the gospel, I think largely for our sake. It is an act of worship and sanctification for us to help others come to Christ. But I believe in a God who's all-powerful, and if he just wanted everyone to have a dream about him and come to him without our intervention whatsoever, he could do that. Now, I don't believe he does do that always, right? But it does happen sometimes. And so I think, in fact, again, to be a little bit provocative, I think it's somewhat filled with hubris to assume that everybody in the world has to be converted to Christianity through humans. I think God's going to use all kinds of means to do that, right? And moreover, it's not even true to say that using AI is devoid of human involvement. We have to program them. We have to facilitate. We have to put the guardrails in place. We have to create, just like a human has to create a web page, right, that someone can then access and so on and so forth. It's all, to me, the same. Like, the medium is not the message. It influences the message in certain ways because it's ingested in certain ways, but it doesn't fundamentally change the message. All right. Okay, so that's this is just to convey that, right? So Marshall McLuhan, this is the famous phrase if you've heard it. So he said the medium is the message. He didn't actually believe that, by the way. Like, it's a quote that was meant to be provocative, right? But if you read what he actually meant by that, his point was just that it is, however, true, right, that the medium does affect the message. Like I said, the simple example is you're going to be more impacted by somebody shouting in your face something than you reading something on a screen, positively or negative. But that's kind of the point, right? It's obviously true that the way something is conveyed, the medium, whether you read it on a screen, whether you see a dramatic interpretation, whether you sing it, or whether an AI tells you it, it's going to influence your perception of it, but the content of the message remains the same nonetheless. All right. So I'm just going to skip to the second part here. The transformative power of the gospel does not rest in human tools, but in the work of the Holy Spirit. So again, that's the idea that even though the medium might affect the message is what I believe the Holy Spirit uses to stir our hearts, right? So that external stimuli. So AI merely serves as another conduit for disseminating divine truth. It neither augments nor reduces the inherent potency of Scripture. I like that word, potency. The gospel is not threatened by technology, and no invention will ever surpass the authority of the one who reigns supreme today, tomorrow, and forevermore. All right, so again, that's the QR code for that. If you want to read the full white paper, again, I'm Jake Carlson, founder of the Apologetics Project. We have a booth downstairs if you want to check us out as well. All right, I'm going to open up for questions for the next 10 minutes, or I have some discussion topics as well if nobody has any questions for me. Go ahead.
What do y'all use doctrinally and to set your guardrails? Because I've been messing with it a little bit, and I've kind of seen where your doctrine is falling. So where do you set those parameters? Yeah,
so we've developed a kind of a global corpus of good Christian content, and we're trying not to be too. Let's put it this way: what you'll see the chatbot responding with is going to be kind of the average of the content that it has, right? And so it's not necessarily that we're imposing a particular secondary doctrine. We're talking about secondary doctrines here, just to be clear.
Right.
Like first order doctrines, lowercase orthodox, Christian beliefs, non-negotiable. We don't have any content in there that doesn't adhere to that, right? But in terms of like old Earth, young Earth, post, pre, trib, all that kind of stuff, it's going to be kind of the average of the content we have. So we have stuff from like, gotquestions.org. They tend to be young earthers, so that kind of, does. I'm an old earther personally, but we also have stuff from Reasons to Believe and some old earth places as well. So short answer to your question is apologist.ai is going to be the average of that stuff. It'll probably convey, a mixture of that. But we partner with ministries and allow them to decide which secondary doctrines they want their chatbot to adhere to. Yeah.
Does the algorithm update itself doctrinally? So if like I'm a Reformed Baptist, and I'm constantly asking it questions, from like the Calvinistic perspective, will the algorithm readjust itself to give me more of that instead of Armenian content? Or
so we use we primarily. I'll get back to this real quick for the guardrails. Back a couple more. This is the mechanism this mechanism and this mechanism are the two that we rely on the most. So we work with Ligonier, for example, right? Super Reformed, right? So very, very hardline Calvinist. And they have their chatbot that only refers to their content. And so it's going to be, they can add to that corpus continuously, but it's always going to be a Reformed perspective. And so their chatbot's going to always respond from that perspective. It just depends on the ministry and what they want to. They can kind of have their own content and then augment that with other ministries' content if they want that are aligned.
And Jake, I heard a slightly different question, so I'm going to answer the question I heard. When you're interacting with apologist.ai, you're not signing in. It's not keeping track of who you are. It's not going to adapt its responses over time based on you.
Yeah, that's
so if you want to narrow in, one of the things that I've used it for is what is the difference between the Reformed view on this and the Catholic view on this, just as a for example, and it can present to me, here's this view, and here's the references, and here's this view, and here are the references, and I can compare those different denominations side by side. It's not a core use, right? It's not for seekers, but it helps me come to a better understanding of different doctrines.
Now, right now, the use of the chatbot is anonymous, right? So like David was saying, if you come back to it later, it's not necessarily going to know like, oh, this guy was probably, reformed or whatever. But within this conversation, it will reference that conversation. And so if you tell it at the outset, I'm reformed or whatever, answer with reformed, theology, then that will be another input in conjunction with the content that it's kind of using retrieval augmented generation to kind of mix those two things, and it should respect kind of your preference. But like I said, like we're really trying to get as many ministries to use our technology to kind of hone in on their doctrinal preferences. So like if you're reformed, we encourage you to go to the Ligonier bot, right? Because you don't have to tell it every time like, hey, I'm reformed or whatever, because you just know that the answers are going to be from that perspective.
The reason why I asked the question really is because I think it was last year at the Passion Conference, Jonathan Pocluda read into ChatGPT what religion makes the most sense or is most likely true or something like that.
Yeah.
And it's like Christianity based off the evidence, but then there was like a Muslim apologist who did the same thing, and it was like Islam is definitely the most likely to be true.
And you can use any combination of these things to do that, right? Like if I tell ChatGPT I'm a Christian and you better answer me as a Christian, and then I can cut that part of the video and then ask it the question. So I'm not saying that he was being deceptive. I'm just saying like it can be faked pretty easily. So yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
With the pushback on generative AI, how do you approach the problem of outreach on getting this chatbot out there, and making it known to other people who would have otherwise never would have figured out that this is an option compared to using ChatGPT?
Yeah, well, I mean, this conference is one example. So we're a sponsor, right? So we try to get as much information out there, and then we do some advertising on Google. In fact, like a lot of our usage internationally is through advertising, right? So we'll advertise, in Turkey specifically, right? And say like, hey, like, you have questions about God, right? And then we'll route them. One thing I didn't mention is we can route those people to a version of the chatbot, right? We're just a platform that has many versions of the chatbot, a version of the chatbot that specifically deals with Muslim ministry, right? 'Cause, most people in Turkey are Muslim. So therefore, we can geo-target to Turkey and have a very Muslim-focused ministry through that. Yeah, but the answer is like we want to do more. We want to be better about that because the more people use it, the more we spread the gospel. So, yeah.
So let's say that you have somebody who through the AI you just shared the gospel, okay, and this person wants to convert to Christianity.
Yeah.
How does discipleship look for a lifetime after that?
That's a great question. So one of the things we emphasize is what we call calls to action rather. Meaning it's not just the response, the generated response of the AI, but then we can use AI to assess where the person is in their spiritual journey, right? So there's been quantifications of this in the past. The Engel scale was kind of one that was used a long time ago. More recently, there's the Crew Audience Map, which is kind of like a somewhat of a rejection of this idea of like quantifying, but it's still buckets people in a region, right, as to kind of like where they are spiritually, right? So some might be hostile. I think the lowest, furthest from Christianity is like hostile, and then the scale goes all the way up to the point of somebody being a missionary, right? So there's a lot of stuff in between, like seekers and then new Christians, that kind of stuff. So we can use AI to analyze the conversation and say, man, this person seems like a seeker. Like they're not obviously like hostile, but they don't believe yet, and they're asking kind of clarifying questions, right? And so we can use AI to assess that, and then based on that assessment, based on some probability of where they fall in that, expose resources, or in some cases like a link to go chat with a human being, right? So you can kind of do that. That's more of kind of helping them, because at a certain point, we think AI is a good kind of start to the conversation, but we're not of the belief that it should be the end, right? Like we don't want to, train up a bunch of people to just talk to AIs about God their whole life. We actually want to get them in community with believers and discipleship.
So I guess like a follow-up for that is like these places that you're talking about that you don't have access, like missionaries can't go in because it's closed off. But if this AI can, then how does it look to get them in a community of believers?
There are other, so we're familiar and partnered with several ministries that have solutions for that. So one way to do it is even if you can't get them into contact with a believer on the ground, you can get them in contact with each other, right? So you get you should check out this app called Waha. It's basically, it facilitates group Bible studies, especially in unreached regions. And so the whole idea is like there's not intervention from there might be like facilitation from afar from a believer who's kind of helping, logistically, but it tries to get people who are trying to learn about Christianity in those unreached places into like a WhatsApp group chat to facilitate a Bible study. And then that app has the content for the Bible study, even though the Christians, even though they make the app, aren't part of that conversation, but they facilitate those people getting together. So there's a lot of like innovative ways to do it. And the key thing for us, though, is that we're not opinionated about how that happens. We think the ministries who are on either on the ground or focusing on those things know a heck of a lot more than we do about how that works best. And so we just try to be as flexible as possible for them to expose any kind of either resources or links or whatever, if it's an app or whatever. So, yeah. Any other questions? Cool. All right. Thanks, guys. You've been great.